So, um, ringtail opossums are an Australian wildlife species that is potentially endangered. Cool. A number, I don't know what number, but a number, so 5, I'm just kidding, of ringtail opossums that have been orphaned and subsequently raised in captivity were monitored after being returned to the wild. Okay. 75% of these opossums were killed by foxes, a species not native to Australia. Oh, okay. Conservationists concluded that native ringtail opossum populations was endangered not by the scarcity of food, as had been previous thought, but by non-native predator species against which the opossum had not developed natural defenses.
So I
Okay.
think I need to get better at being skeptical of arguments because I read this and I was like, I don't really see what's wrong with it. This makes sense to me. And I still got the answer right, but like clearly, obviously there's something wrong here, right? And I like didn't pick up on it.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like there's a couple things that I'm like very what we used a really good word, skeptical of. I'm like, okay, 75%. Like, what if this was 4 and 3 of them were killed by foxes? And there just
Mhm.
happened to be in an area where foxes were. Does that mean that the native ringtail opossum population is endangered by this non-native species over the scarcity of food? Because we're one and two, like we're also my also big issue here is, and I'm gonna reread this to make sure I'm not missing something where these ones, these um these ones are the ones that had been orphaned and raised in captivity. And then
Mhm.
we make this jump to talk about like the whole population. Like, couldn't it be that just the ones that are in captivity are not good at defending themselves to the wild, but the ones that were born in the wild and were raised in the wild are
They
totally
learned to do
fine?
it. Oh, you could say, I guess you could argue that's a learned behavior, right? Like the ones in the wild learned to do it, and the ones in
Yeah, I mean,
captivity
think about
didn't
like,
learn.
isn't that why like sometimes it's like unfortunate, but like when animals are born in zoos, like oftentimes like we can't release them to the wild because they would never be able to learn to defend themselves.
Yeah, so I guess it's almost like the nature versus nurture thing. Like this thing is saying it's like a nature thing, and genetically they have not developed those natural defenses. But you could argue, well, maybe it's a learned thing, and
Right.
75% of
Yeah.
them got
So
killed because they just
at
never
the
learned.
very core of it, it's saying like you're taking a part of
Mhm,
it and
mhm,
acting as if we were applying it to the whole here. Like we're assuming that what is true of these that were raised in captivity is going to be
mhm.
true of the whole population. And there could be very many differences between those two.
Let me just write that down. We're assuming.
So we're saying that 75% that were grown, that were raised in captivity, were
Yeah.
killed. And then we go on to say that that means that all opossums
Mhm,
have not developed natural defenses. When
uh-huh.
really, couldn't just these ones that were raised in captivity not develop natural defenses?
Oh, okay.
They're assuming that it's true of the whole native ringtail opossum population.
Mhm.
And we don't know that. Like we're basing it off of too small of a sample size.
Oh, I guess so. Whenever you see a sample size argument, you want to immediately be skeptical of that and be like, can we really conclude what's
Um,
true about this part
More
is true?
than that, whenever I see a percentage, I want
Uh-huh.
to know percent of what for starters. And I'm like, 75% means nothing without a number. Like that's a Malcolm Gladwell quote, right? I don't know if you know Malcolm Gladwell. He's one of my favorites
Uh-huh.
sociologists. But he says like a number, a percentage without another number means nothing. Like we
Isn't
don't,
75% a lot though? That's what I
but what
thought.
if it's a 4 people? Or
Uh-huh.
like, have you ever heard like in the media
Oh.
when it says like, oh, the amount of murders went up 200% today. Well, 2 people were killed today and 0 were killed yesterday. But they use
Oh,
percentages to like freak the world out, right?
very true. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so that was my first, but that actually isn't necessarily the main issue here because
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't then go on to say, like have like almost a percentage flaw. The issue is we're saying what is true of the small population is true
Hmm.
of the whole population.
Yeah. Um,
It's a good question.
okay. Let me just process that for a second.
Oh, of course. Okay, so then we got So A, there are fewer non-native predator species that prey on the ring than there are native species that prey. Like, we don't care about
Yeah, butt
the
number.
ones
Yeah,
more, not at all. B, foxes were introduced into Australia over 200 years ago, adapted. No, we don't care about the
relevant.
name.
Yeah.
C, the ringtail opossums that were raised in captivity were fed a diet similar to which the ringtail opossums typically eat in the wild. Well, that doesn't mean that that food is available in the wild. Like, just because they typically eat it in the wild, so that doesn't really help us explain that there is like a non-native predatory
Mhm.
species. D, few of the species that compete with the ringtail possum for food sources are native to Australia.
Also relevant.
Oh, I was thinking, I was like, oh, let me think.
Oh,
Has been a like, but by native species. Oh, I was thinking that if the native species not only can kill them, but the native species is also eating their food. But that doesn't
oh,
strengthen that it's not by food scarcity.
right.
So
Yeah.
I wouldn't love
That's
it.
funny.
And then E, ringtail possums that grow to adulthood in the wild defend themselves against foxes. No, yeah, that's literally when we found our flaw, when we say like find the flaw and fix it, this
Yeah.
finds the flaw and fixes it.
Yeah. Yeah. That